My name is Jimmy Adcock and I am a geophys specialist at Guideline Geo. We manufacture, among other things, radar systems that have been used on Time Team episodes old and new. My own personal Time Team journey started 20 years ago with John Gator's survey team, and since then I've worked on prehistoric sites, massive Roman forts, the gardens of Windsor Castle and even Shakespeare's house. But I will forgive you for not recognising mon visage. As my mother always says, his feet are more famous than his face. This week, I will be travelling to Louisiana in the United States of America, not with a radar system, but with one of these, a resistivity tomography unit. I'm hoping to be able to help a team of archaeologists answer some questions about a mega prehistoric site called Poverty Point. Let me give you some stats. Poverty Point comprises of a 43-acre plaza full of timber circles that is surrounded by 6 massive concentric semicircular ridges, some 3/4 of a mile across, which are in turn surrounded by a series of earth mounds. The largest of these is 70 feet tall, 700 feet long and 650 feet wide, and is made of 15.5 million baskets of soil. They reckon that a large proportion of it could have been built inside of 3 months. The site has returned over 8,000 intact spearheads and countless stone artifacts, despite the fact that there is no natural stone for miles around, and geological analysis has shown that some of these raw materials had travelled hundreds of miles to get there, which is very impressive, and even more so when you consider that this was built by a hunter-gatherer society. 3.5 millennia ago, hunter-gatherers built effectively a city. Massive infrastructure, the likes of which just weren't seen in the Western Hemisphere. Anything that even comes close to paralleling the size of infrastructure here would have been built by communities who had already harnessed formal agriculture. It's this uniqueness that allowed Poverty Point to gain World Heritage status from UNESCO in 2014. But there are still unanswered questions as to why this site exists and why it exists where it does. A good argument is that for trade, it sits on the side of a river that links very easily to the Mississippi and therefore much of North America. Previous geophysical survey has revealed small enigmatic mounds buried beneath the plaza. These mounds are nowhere near the scale of the man-made ones that still extant around the ridges. However, the question remains as to whether they are made by human hand or whether they're natural. And if they are natural mounds, could they possibly be mud volcanoes? Not heard of a mud volcano? I don't blame you. Let me enlighten you. Mud volcanoes are formed on sites that sit over gas fields. The gas works its way up towards the surface, and as it goes, it pushes groundwater with it. This then mixes with the soils near surface and erupts into a fairly unimpressive, most of the time, small mound of mud that gradually over time builds. These things are bubbly, wet, smelly, and sometimes on fire because the gas is combustible. And so imagine being a hunter-gatherer community wandering the Mississippi Delta and one day coming across a clearing full of oozing, smelly mounds of mud, possibly on fire. It would be very hard to explain, probably something you'd want to respect, and possibly a good enough reason to build the world's first hunter-gatherer city. Well, we've made it. We're here at Poverty Point. It is chucking it down rain at the moment. I'm reliably informed the weather is going to get much, much better, warmer, hotter, sunnier, which will be very useful given how much work we've got to do here. So yeah, fingers crossed for this to stop and the sun to make an appearance.
Leading the survey team are Dr. Diana Greenlee, Poverty Point Station archaeologist, and Dr. Renita Dallen, Professor of Anthropology. I got them to talk me through the history of the site and the initial discovery of these mystery mounds.
So we've said that these are
buried mound-like features. I mean, this looks quite a lot smaller than the earthwork mounds that are extant. So do we think these are just smaller examples that have been buried for some reason or lost to agriculture, or is there something significantly different about these?
Yeah, they do look different. For one thing, they are buried, so they're not sticking up above the ground. But the fill is unlike any of the mound fill or any of the soils that we see at the site. So it's very strange looking fill, and also sort of incredible to think about them building a hole and then putting a mound in it.
Yes, it would be slightly unusual. But I mean, have you done any invasive work on these to see if there's like cultural material coming out of them, or is it just purely their appearance in the geophysics and their physical positioning that makes you think, well, this might not be the same?
No, we did do quite a lot of direct investigations, largely coring.
These are cores. This is from the larger anomaly, and you can see this is from outside and at the same depth within the anomaly. And you can see all these dark bits that are definitely not in there. And this is the second smaller anomaly, and that's outside, and this is inside, and you can see this dark material, the paraffin dirt, we think.
Yeah.
We haven't found artifact one in the body of that feature.
Okay.
So very clean, which is also extremely unusual for the site.
Later on, in much better weather, the team and I head over to Feature 1 with the resistivity system in tow. Once the equipment is set up, including a very noisy generator that rapidly became the soundtrack of our lives, it's that exciting moment when data starts to appear on the screen.
If there was any question as to why the people of Poverty Point would have wanted to build their houses on a series of ridges, go to all that effort to make some high ground, then when you come down into the plaza area, it's pretty self-evident. So if you just have a little look down at my feet, yeah, wet socks for me. So behind me here, we've got one of our survey lines. Row of electrodes, and at the centre of it is an instrument, and the instrument is selecting different electrodes to take measurements from. It'll select 2 to inject current, and then a whole bunch of pairs of electrodes to measure voltage at. And the voltage and the current allow us to calculate a resistivity. That resistivity will then show us the structure and the changes in composition beneath the survey lines. And what we're hoping to be able to see is evidence of these buried mound-like features that they saw in the original GPR survey. Hopefully we'll be able to tell them a little bit more about the composition and maybe even what's underneath them.
To me, that we're getting the mound coming in through there, and that it stays symmetric. That on then look, it seems skewed to the north, the high point.
These white posts are marking out the position of the timber circles, or some of the timber circles that were within the plaza itself and have been identified from the magnetic geophys survey that had previously been done. This one I would guess is about 60 feet in diameter, maybe 20 meters, maybe a bit more. And then over in the background there, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a much, much larger one. And then we'll be right up against that when we do the survey over Feature 2. The timber circles go up to about 220 feet, I think it is the largest, somewhere like that. So these are just a couple of the examples. And if I keep swinging round, then that's our survey area for Feature 1. And this has timber circles butting up against it as well. They're just not currently marked out. So it seems that these features, as we said, respect, or the timber circles respect these features.
While the survey team continues working on Feature 1, I head over to Mound A, located to the west of the plaza. Mound A isn't just one of the largest mounds on site, it's one of the largest found in North America. 72 feet tall, 710 feet long, and 660 feet wide. Archaeologists are a little uncertain as to what its purpose was. there is no evidence that it was used as a burial mound or as a platform for other structures. And in fact, some archaeologists have even hypothesized that its unusual shape is intended to resemble a bird, complete with set of wings and a tail. And certainly from some angles, I could almost believe it.
It's the end of our first day here at Poverty Point doing this resistivity investigation. Behind me down there is the rest of the survey team. They're just packing the last few bits into the utility vehicle to take back to the storage unit. I'm up on top of Mound A, just having to think about what we've managed to achieve today. So we managed to get 11 profiles done today, 40-metre long profiles, 81 electrodes in each of those profiles. We've collected about 18,000 data points, and we'll take those 2D lines and we'll put them into a 3D block that we can then process, and hopefully we can cut and look at the buried feature number 1 from different angles, so we can slice through it horizontally and look at it at different depths, or we can cut profiles through it in any direction. So 11 lines takes us almost to the end of that first feature. So we've got probably another 4 profiles to do in the morning, and then we're going to move over to feature 2 and we'll start there. And we're going to do a slightly different approach there. Rather than doing these 2D lines that we're going to put together like slices in a loaf of bread, at that site we're going to lay out a grid of electrodes, and we're going to allow the instrument to switch between all of those electrodes in the grid and collect a 3D data set in one go, rather than doing it as individual lines and having to put them together as part of the processing.
So after wrapping up on site, I head back to the accommodation to begin processing the day's data. Eventually, fueled by some good southern cooking, the data reveals the shape of the underground mound as a blue, low resistivity zone pushing up to the more colourful, higher resistivity areas. And we think those are evidence of material brought in to level the plaza.
Wow. And look what happens at the bottom. Isn't that interesting?
And the north side was the side where we had I was looking with Tad at the kind of the profile, and the fact that we had kind of that higher resistivity stuff seemed to be a bit deeper on one side of the mound.
The limits of the lowest resistivity values seem to match the previous GPR survey very closely. In true Time Team tradition, I set up my laptop in the back of the car to show the rest of the team our results from day 1, which included an exciting anomaly that could indicate a key feature of a mud volcano.
Right at the end of last night, I put some of the lines from the very centre of the feature into the 2D.
Okay.
And I think it's more interesting.
Okay.
Because obviously the mound bit the feature as we would know it is down to 2 and a bit meters, so that's that.
Okay.
But then beneath that,
Oh, wow. Is that our vent?
is it our vent?
Gosh.
Is it our vent?
So I mean,
And so are those 3 consecutive
yeah.
lines?
So it's 7, 8,
Whoa.
and 9.
And you,
Lines 7, 8, and 9. So they're pretty much right over the middle.
yeah.
Wow.
You know, that's more evidence of where the
vent.
fluid is mixing
Yeah.
and pushing up,
Yeah.
and then spewing out sideways.
Back on site for the second day of survey, and work begins on feature 2.
Now, feature 2 has some similarities in that it looks very similar in the GPR data. It has circles, timber circles, that seem to respect its position. The timber circles are butting up against the mound rather than going over it. The difference here is that it's much smaller. So that allows us to take a slightly different approach. Instead of having these long lines of electrodes that we collect one at a time next to each other, here we're going to lay out a grid of electrodes in a rectangular shape and then let the instrument work through those. Might give us a little bit more detail, but again, the main thing we're trying to look at is the structure of these mounds, how they relate to the material above, around and below them, and also to determine whether we can see any evidence that these are indeed mud volcanoes. Is there anything beneath them that suggests there's a pathway for fluid that would have come up, mixing the soils and then breaking the surface and causing that mound to be created.
Now, you can't travel halfway around the world to a World Heritage Site and not visit the museum, and I was lucky enough to have a private tour with park manager Mark, who talked me through the diverse material culture of the Poverty Point civilization.
Now, I've heard a lot about the Poverty Point objects. What are they?
Okay. Poverty Point objects are a ubiquitous artifact that is tied to the Poverty Point site and the Poverty Point culture. And more or less, they're artificial cooking stones. So all around North America, thousands of years ago, people heated rocks in fires and then used that radiant heat from the rocks to cook food. Because Poverty Point was a place without any native stone, and the closest stones were like 30 miles away, 40 kilometers or so, they created their very own artificial stones that we call Poverty Point objects. They're made from fired earth, and we know they tie to this ancient culture because they created them in at least 6 standard styles.
Right.
That are all found here at the site. And then some of these standard styles are found at hundreds and hundreds of other archaeological sites. Okay,
Yeah.
so it shows the culture traveled from this site. They all originally had heads, as far as we can tell, but most of them had their heads broken off.
I was going to say, is that symbolic, or were they made like that, or is that just that, it is a weak point?
Some archaeologists have speculated that the heads were removed as part of a ritual, but there's no direct proof of that, ever happening. These owl pendants are something that we see specifically tied to the Poverty Point culture. They're made of red jasper, which is a fancy way of saying any red-colored shirt.
Okay, yeah. Oh, but you would want to be using that for hunting, surely. You want your shirt for
You could, but the red color may have been important symbolism to these ancient people.
Yeah.
This one, the features that make it an owl are raised instead of drilled in. But it's a completely different material. This one is made of galena.
I was going to say, that's sparkling. I wondered if that was... I've seen there's a big lump of galena in the one of the other cases.
Right.
So.
And that stuff was imported from up to like 1,000 miles away.
We're nearing the end of a pretty hot and sticky second day here at Poverty Point. And, in fact, we've gone past the end of a second hot and sticky day at Poverty Point. It's about 7 o'clock at night. We've probably got about another 50 minutes or so of data collection to do. But the 3D grid we're working on is all laid out, everything's hooked up, so we're just waiting for the instrument to chug through the data collection, which has given me an opportunity to have a bit of a walk around the parts of the site I haven't seen before. And one of the things I wanted to come and look at was on the east side of the plaza, what they call the dock. So this is really low-lying ground where the trade would have come in and out of, so it's right next to the river. And I hadn't really appreciated just how high up the plaza and the rest of the site is compared to the level of the river. So you would have bought your boats in here and you would have seen nothing of the site itself until you'd climbed up this hill that's behind me. So this probably disappears into the sunlight a little bit, but you can see the ridge is kind of around here somewhere. So you'd come in your boat, you've got all this trade, you've heard of this amazing site, where you want to bring this stuff to, and all you can see is a slightly grassy mound. You come up to the top of that and all of a sudden you'd have been confronted with everything. You'd have seen the ridges, the dwellings on top, the mounds. And we have to remember that at that time, a big sort of conurbation like that, that many people living together in this kind of organized, structured society just wasn't a thing. So it must have been a real feast for the eyes as you came up and crested that hill.
The welcome end of another day on site heralds time for a hot shower and the start of a long evening of data processing. The results from Feature 2 show, as we'd expect, lower resistivity values associated with the location of the buried mound. But there's slightly higher resistivity values running in a band beneath the centre. Could this be evidence of the material welling up, of the gas pushing its way towards the surface to create a mound?
Okay, back out in the field for day 3 now. We're back at feature 1 now on the western side of the plaza out by the ridges, and the reason for coming back here is that when we looked at the earlier resistivity data that we've collected, we had set the instrument up to focus really on the archaeological levels. So you have a bit of a compromise to make when you set up an ERT survey. You can put your electrodes very close together, but limit the depth, or you can spread the electrodes out, which gives you greater depth, but it reduces the resolution that you have. The alternative is you add more electrodes onto your line so that you can have them close together and covering a large area that allows you to then look deeper. So that's what we've come back to do. We've added extra electrodes to the end of those nice straight 2D lines that we were doing before, and that'll allow us to push down probably about 50% deeper than we were before.
The cloud that rolled in today has delivered us a bit of rain, but that's no bad thing when you're doing a resistivity survey, actually. What we're trying to do is persuade electricity to flow from very nice conductive wires and through conductive electrodes into what is a relatively resistive ground. So if we can ease the passage of current from our electrodes into the ground, all the better. And this looks very different from what we saw in the other lines, all of which were running north-south. So we see a lot more banding in the raw data that we didn't see on the others. So it'd be really interesting to see how this comes out with the inversion. Another hour, another survey line. This time we're over at feature 2 again. And we've done these 2 long lines over feature 1, one running roughly west-east and the other roughly south-north. And those are to give us the depth, give us the information about what's happening in the geology underneath these buried mounds. So now we're going to do the same trick over feature 2 and see what we get from down beneath that. All done, 3 days of hot, sweaty survey. Now just a small matter of looking through rather a large amount of data, processing it and interpreting it.
A couple of months later, I caught up with Diana and Renita to discuss the final results with them.
Very good. Right, so I have finally finished processing all the data from the 2 different areas. I would say that definitely the data from area 1 is better than area 2. So if we found nothing out from this, that process of doing the single lines and then combining it worked a lot better than the kind of effort we went to make the 3D layout. I'm actually going to work backwards. So I'm going to start with area 2. So we had the long lines that we were just talking about, these long lines which allow us to see deeper, see more of the underlying geology. The pattern that we see everywhere is the same. So that is that we have like a base geological unit, we have this what I will call the middle unit, we then have the truncated soils above, the cultural fill that was put in, and then our mound pushing up from that kind of middle zone. The question has, you know, the main question that we had was, well, is the material that is in the mound here imported? Has it been constructed like some of the other earthworks on the site? And then, has the rest of the site been adapted around that? And I think even from the first line, as soon as we looked at that first line of data, we were getting the impression that the mound is feeling much more like it's something of below rather than something that's been brought in. And so the similarity in the resistivity profile of the material that is in the mound structure compared to what is directly beneath it is, I mean, to all intents and purposes, identical. So these are our 2 profiles now together. They both tell us the same thing, which is that this resistivity is increasing as we get deeper. We get into some kind of other geological material once we're down there, and that there is some kind of contouring within that. Now, the question is whether that contouring is actually part of this process of the welling up of material, because I think that what we see in this data is very much telling us that that interpretation of them being mud volcanoes is correct, because we have that same material from below pushed up above. So if I move to over to area 1, same pattern again, low resistivity pushing up into the mound, very much the same values that we're seeing So this one, we collected the lines that we could then put them into a block. And then the final thing that we were able to do with this data set then was to be able to actually model that as a 3D block and not just slice through it. So here we've got the kind of bottom of that overburden with the higher resistivity values. Then we've got the mound here in the middle, poking up through that material. And then underneath we've got that continuous unit of low resistivity. And so what you see is this kind of lip, which we were talking about, that you can see in the slices as you go down. So it feels like you've got this kind of core of material, the mixed material, and then that it is pushed up and out, slumped to each side, and that's caused this kind of lip that we see, and that was the limit of where the GPR could see. So the summary is that I think with the distinct similarity in resistivity values between this natural unit underneath and that mound itself, the complete lack of any boundary between the mound and that natural unit, and this sort of lip that we see of potentially slumped material, to me, I mean, I would never, if you'd have given me this data set blind, I'd have never interpreted it as a mud volcano, because, I mean, who would? But I can't, knowing that they are present in that bit of the world, I can't think of another interpretation that would provide us with, or another interpretation that would fit this data as we look at it.
Well, I think it's amazing definition, especially on this anomaly one, and getting more of the shape of it. That's just amazing, and to me, very compelling for thinking about how it formed. So that's just fantastic. And just even looking at those long lines and thinking, oh my gosh, if you cross the site with a bunch of these lines, we would know a lot about fill depth and structure of ridges and mounds. And it seems to have done an amazing job.
Yeah, I have to say, I think when we were about halfway through the first day, I was I was really kind of hoping that this would work, because we were putting a lot of effort into that. And
when can you come back?
when does this? Not when it's hot. That's the only thing. I think I've never felt more like an Englishman than when I was sweating away carrying stuff around. But yeah, anytime, really.
It's been a real privilege to work at Poverty Point and be just a small part of the ongoing research that's happening there. And regardless of the outcomes of this survey, it's clear that there are lots of questions still to be answered about this enigmatic site.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.